you explain jihad better than any Westerner I know. And you have 8 types of jihad. We went through this before, but very quickly, if you can go to those 8 things about jihad that the world needs to know.
Well, again, the vast majority of Muslims are peaceable people, and many are my very close friends.
Yes.
But for those who would regard themselves as Islamists, or who are part of what I would say is political and militant Islam, there is a very real agenda.
Yes.
And in fact, ISIS talks about the caliphate, imposing their version of Islam and Islamic domination wherever they can, and increasing that, so they'd love to have it ultimately worldwide. And there are 2 meanings to the word jihad. One is one we could all, I think, subscribe to. It means struggle for a good life. It means a personal, spiritual struggle. No problem with that. But military jihad, or jihad with an agenda to overtake and to dominate, is, I think, of great concern to us. And looking at what's happening in the world today, and in Western countries too, one can discern a number of ways in which strategic or political Islam are actually working very effectively. First of all, there is legal jihad and the introduction of Sharia courts and Sharia councils into Britain, and the development of the practice of the principles of Sharia law through those courts and councils. Now that is very dangerous for 2 reasons. One is it's a threat to the fundamental principle of democracy, of one law for all, because it's a quasi-parallel legal system, but also it is inherently discriminatory against women. And women are really suffering in this country because of the provisions and the rulings of the Sharia courts and councils. The asymmetrical access to divorce. Husband can just say in some forms of Sharia law, I divorce you 3 times and he's free. The women have to pay, they often don't have the money, they have to go through all sorts of conditions, and they're often trapped in those marriages, devout Muslim women who will not marry again without an Islamic divorce and can't get it for a variety of reasons.
Is it happening in UK right
big
now?
Big time. Yes, I mean,
men can say 3 times
yes.
Divorce, and they can divorce their wives in UK.
Yes, absolutely. And related to that, of course, is polygamy. Now, in Britain, it's illegal to have bigamy, but polygamy is very, very widespread in these communities. So, again, women are suffering. Of just about to, as of today actually, release a report written by a very brave Muslim woman about Muslim marriages in this country. She interviewed 50 Muslim ladies in the West Midlands, and many of them are in polygamous marriages and desperately unhappy. So there is the whole aspect of Sharia law and its implications, and also the unequal inheritance laws. You know, a man or girl gets half of what a boy or a woman gets. I mean, there's so much discrimination there. And in Britain, we're meant to be committed to eradication of gender discrimination. I always say what's happening to these women in these communities will make the suffragettes turn in their graves. And it's happening in Britain today, and I think it's probably happening quite a lot in the States, but may not be quite so widely recognised. So that's legal jihad. There's financial jihad, Sharia finance. And 3 of our Prime Ministers, Prime Ministers Blair, Brown and Cameron, they've all said they'd like London to become the Sharia finance capital of the world, which is actually extremely unsatisfactory, potentially quite dangerous. So there's Sharia finance. There's financial jihad. There's cultural jihad, massive investment, particularly by Saudi Arabia, in our universities, in schools, and bringing in ideologies which, again, many of those would go down the Islamist end of the dimension, and a huge amount of money. And interestingly, some actually go into theological colleges.
Yes.
Well, it's very intelligent, because we ought to be having, I think, a genuine, open and honestly sort of critical debate.
Yes.
But once you're funded, then who knows how really impartial and unconditional that debate is going to be.
Absolutely.
So there is, I think, cultural jihad, and then there is demographic jihad. One of the outcomes of this growth of polygamous marriages is, I was told by some Muslim ladies in this country, men in their communities may have 20 kids. Now, those children will be growing up presumably in somewhat dysfunctional families, many of them, and they would be very ripe for radicalization. So demographic jihad is another very dangerous form of jihad.
Yes.
Then there is humanitarian jihad. This is more in countries like Sudan, around the world, where Islamic aid is usually conditional on conversion. And I've found this again and again in Sudan and other countries. In fact,
Like feeding people, taking care
yeah,
of
but
people.
only if you convert to Islam.
Wow.
So we hear this again and again in Sudan and other places. If your kids are ill and you take them to a clinic, they may not get treated unless they convert. So I always put it rather sort of broadly, but they may go in with 2 Christian names and come out with 2 Islamic names. But our friends down in South Sudan are really worried because they fought this horrendous war for their freedom. And now Christian mission seems to have abated somewhat. We seem to be rather self-conscious about mission, and all the money is not going into it. And there are 3 bishops in one of the dioceses in South Sudan, the Roman Catholic bishop, the Presbyterian, Evangelical Presbyterian bishop, and the Anglican bishop. And they had in their possession a document of the agenda and the budget for the Islamization of South Sudan. $29 million. It had gone to Saudi Arabia. It had gone to Libya in Gaddafi days. That money was pouring in, and they're desperate. They say, all this Islamic aid is coming in, it's conditional. And here was the punchline. They said, we're losing in peace what we managed to hang on to at such terrible cost in war, with humanitarian jihad. And in northern Uganda, there's a huge amount of economic investment there by various Islamic big money corporations and owners and so on. And there was one of the leading clergy in Uganda. He said, desperate, because of course economic power brings political power and domination. And here's a challenge, I think, for those of us who live in the West. He said, well, Islam invests for mission, and the West only invests for profit. Islam is going to win. And I came back and I put this to one of my friends in the City of London who's in the world of business. And I said, any chance at all that Christian business might invest for mission? And his answer was, forget it. In the world of the city, in the world of the big corporations, the only talk is about Mumbai, Shanghai and Dubai.
Yes.
We've got to wake up. We've got the resources in the West to be able to invest for mission. But at the moment we're just profit conscious, only profit conscious in that part of the world. And Islam is thinking strategically.
Yes.
And my cri de coeur is, West, wake up. Because once a country like Uganda, the economic domination is Islamic owned, well then it's very hard to see how that future is going to develop without real problems for freedom as we would want it, and for religious freedom as we would want it.
Yes.
And then there's military jihad. On the whole, you will find that when such communities are in a minority, then it's rather like communism. Communism operates on exactly the same principles. In a minority, you're below the ground, you're just putting your people in place, but you're not causing trouble above the surface. You reach a critical mass, and then you get your military jihad. And I think we've got to wake up, and we have to start praying for wisdom and discernment.
Yes.
Because people are suffering now in ISIS areas, and the suffering is horrendous, and the policies are brutal, and they are already where it's at. But we can't afford, as Christians, we should be alongside them anyway in solidarity with their suffering.
Absolutely.
But even if we were not feeling a religious obligation, a Christian obligation to be alongside them in their suffering, in their persecution, just if you're only interested in self-interest, then it's going to come. Archbishop Daniel Deng, who is the Archbishop of Sudan, a wonderful man, he's seen far too much suffering in his life. He said something which reflected something which Archbishop Ben Kwashi in Nigeria said in a totally different context. But they both said it, and I think we need to listen to them seriously because they're speaking from experience. Archbishop Ben Kwashi in Nigeria, where Boko Haram is rampant and so many martyrs already this year, he said, first of all, if we have a faith worth living for, as I said earlier, it's a faith worth dying for. Don't you betray the faith we are living and dying for. My argument to that is we are betraying it by allowing things like Sharia law in our own country, utterly incompatible with the values of what this country should stand for. But then he said something else. If you don't fight these battles now, your grandchildren are going to have to fight the battles you have not had the courage to fight.
Where are we leaving this world?
And then Archbishop Daniel Deng, in a totally different context, but it wasn't the same conference in Jihad. He just said, if you don't fight these battles now, your grandchildren are going to have to fight the battles you've not had the courage to fight, and they're going to have to fight with guns. We've got freedom now. We have the privilege of freedom. We have a gospel of love,
That's right.
which we must use. But we have to use both of those great privileges of freedom and a religion of love to be alongside those who are suffering. But we also have to have wisdom and discernment to make sure that we use our freedoms for them who don't have it, but to protect our own. Because we have inherited a wonderful political, spiritual and cultural heritage. And I believe we have a duty to pass that on undiminished to our children and our grandchildren. At the moment, we are letting an enormous amount happen, which can threaten that. And we will be responsible. Political jihad. And that's those who use the freedoms of democracy to destroy the democracy and the freedoms it enshrines. And we see that, for example, in Britain. Some years ago there was a bill going through Parliament which would have had in it, it wasn't on the face of the bill, but it was certainly there in provisions, the provision that it would be a criminal offence to say anything negative about Islam, to say anything positive about another faith, because that can give offence, and to make jokes about Islam. And it would have been a criminal offence punishable with up to 6 years in prison. Well, fortunately, we discerned that as it was going through the House of Lords. And we realised there were freedoms here we had to protect. Now, one of the things that tends to happen in Britain is if you say anything negative about Islam, you'll be called racist. People don't like being called racist.
Or hate crime.
Yes, but the racist one I managed to prevent because I had a meeting the day before the bill began to be discussed in the House of Lords with the leaders of the black churches. So when the main debate about this bill came on in the House of Lords, the black churches had all gathered outside Parliament and were demonstrating, and they were singing. It was wonderful. They sang Amazing Grace. You could hear it inside Parliament. And
when was that?
About 4 or 5 years ago. I can give you the details. And they sang Amazing Grace, and they had these wonderful placards with all the things that need to be said, like freedom to choose and change religion, freedom of speech, etc. And so I was able to stand up in the House of Lords and say, in raising these amendments to protect our fundamental freedoms, let no one say we're being racist. Look who's demonstrating out there.
That's right.
And they demonstrated again and again, but Britain's freedom hung on a thread at that time because we did manage to get the amendments to protect those fundamental freedoms, I call them the freedom amendments, onto the bill in the House of Lords, but then all legislation goes through both houses of Parliament. So it went to the House of Commons, and Tony Blair, the then Prime Minister, under enormous influence, I think, from some of the political Muslims in this country, was determined to remove the House of Lords freedom amendments. So all the black churches gathered again, and they sang again, and then some of them went and lobbied members of Parliament that afternoon, and they managed to change the mind of 9 members of Parliament. So when the vote came to remove the freedom amendments, the first was lost by 10 votes. And then the whips, as we call them, got busy and got people to line up and vote. And Britain's freedom hung on a thread that day. The second vote to remove those freedom amendments to protect the fundamental freedom of speech in this country, United Kingdom, was lost by 1 vote. God is a good mathematician.
Yes.
But it does show we do need wisdom, discernment, and practical action to protect those freedoms. So we've got to wake up, look out. And I suppose my motto is look out, in the sense of look out to be aware of the threats to our faith and freedom, but also look out to the bigger world, beyond our immediate horizons, to the world out there where people are now paying the price of freedom.
Absolutely. And yesterday I was looking at the business cards of British Parliament, House of the Lords. It has a lion and a lamb. It has, in the logo. And it just touched my heart, and it struck me that this country is founded in every way on the biblical principles. And to see in this country, like, house divided itself cannot stand. And seeing Sharia law being in effect in this great country. And then this is so much against democracy. This is so much against human rights. And allowing those women, Muslim women, being suffered in polygamy, being suffered under physical abuse, and just doing nothing about it, but legalizing it, the crime. It's such a heartbreaking thing, even for me as a former Muslim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we need to pray. We really need to pray, and we need to stand up. And I just want to thank you for standing up. It must not be easy. I am sure you are persecuted. I am sure you have you are facing a lot of opposition, right? Like you said, being called even racist for standing up.
Well, as Christians,
Yes,
we know that only the truth can make us free.
that's right.
We have to tell the truth,
Yes,
and the truth is challenging.
absolutely. Well, recently I was at a meeting and God started really moving in my heart personally to be an advocate, like you said, be voice for the voiceless, stand up for those, speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. And you are one of the biggest advocates or voice for the voiceless. And you've been to Sudan and you purchased over 2,000 girls from sex slavery, right? So tell us about your journey and what is happening today.
Well, first and foremost,
Yes.
as a Christian,
Yes.
we all believe of the enormous importance of respecting freedom for all people,
Yes.
and justice,
Yes.
peace. And I think we have an obligation to respond and help those who are denied their freedom.
That's right.
And I'm very worried that really we've gone to sleep on the business of slavery. And there's some years back, we had in this country the commemoration or celebration of the bicentenary of William Wilberforce and his parliamentary achievements to end the slave trade in the British Empire at that time. A long, tough battle, he fought in Parliament, but he did achieve that legislation. So there were a lot of, celebrations. I was worried. We spent the whole time looking back. And I personally, obviously I celebrate William Wilberforce. I pay tribute to him. It's wonderful to work in the building where he achieved that.
Yes.
So a lot to celebrate. But I actually can't feel guilty about what other people did in another era. So I don't go on a guilt trip about the past. I need a guilt trip on the present, on what I do and what I don't do.
Yeah.
So for me, I felt that one thing I could do in that year was to remind the world just how much slavery still exists. And there are at least 27 million men, women and children suffering some kind of slavery in the world today.
27
At
million.
At least. I mean,
Yes.
probably many, many more we don't know
Yes.
about. So I wrote a book
Yes.
called this Immoral Trade, Slavery in the 21st Century. In the heart of the book are 3 chapters of people into whose eyes I have looked,
Yes.
who've been today's slaves. I've heard their stories. I've heard what anguish they've gone through in their own lives. And those stories give you a little bit of insight of the horrors of slavery for individuals, for their families, their communities. And those stories, everyone is completely heart-wrenching stories. Many are from Sudan, where we had the privilege of rescuing, and they're our first life stories. These people I'm speaking to have suffered, but they're heart-wrenching stories. And then others from Burma, sex slavery, forced labor, and then others from northern Uganda, the children who were abducted by the notorious so-called Lord's Resistance Army.
Yes.
At least 25,000 children, at least. I'm talking about 10, 12-year-old young teenagers, brutalized, forced marched to army camps, given live ammunition, taught how to use live ammunition, use other children as live target practice, to kill other children. One girl spoke to me and she said, I'll never forget, one morning I woke up and I was forced to kill a boy, another child with a panga knife and drink his blood. I still wake up with nightmares remembering that day. What could I do? It was him or me. Now these things are happening in our lifetime. So the point of this book was to highlight the fact we have an obligation,
Yes.
particularly as Christians,
Yes.
to work for people who are still enslaved.
What can be done?
Well, I'm speaking this afternoon in
Yes.
the House of Lords on a modern slavery bill here.
Wow.
my concern is that we who have freedom and our governments, free nations, should be doing much more to cooperate, collaborate, to call those governments to account in countries where slavery is still permitted, to raise the whole issue, and then to encourage organisations as well who are trying to work with those people who are enslaved to free them and to care for the victims. And people who've been enslaved have gone through hell, humiliation, often physical abuse, physical torture, hopelessness. So we need to be doing much more internationally to identify slavery, to call governments to account, to stop slavery in their own countries, and to work for the victims of slavery. But there's a huge amount of work to do.
Yes. What are the major countries that you see in the world that is supporting, unintentionally, would say, sex slavery and human trafficking?
Well, it's very hard to get figures of those, but
right.
we know there is an enormous amount going on in many, many countries, and different kinds of slavery too. India, for example, there are very real problems with bonded labour, people who are so poor and they were selling themselves into slavery, a desperate effort to try to get enough money to get out of slavery, and they never do, they're trapped in it. But also HART, our small NGO, or not-for-profit organisation, is working with a bigger organisation in India, Operation Mercy India, to help the women, and sometimes boys, but predominantly girls and women, who've been given into what are called temple service. Now they're dedicated to the temples at a young age, maybe 5 or 6, a little ceremony. It's very poignant because the girls are given little necklaces of red and white beads. And they think at the time that's lovely. But of course that service becomes servicing.
This is like temple prostitutes, right?
That's right, yes.
Wow.
They're called Devadasi or Jungini. And it becomes servicing about 20 men a day when they reach puberty, either in the brothels, a place like Mumbai, or sometimes they're sent back to villages to be the local available woman. And they have a horrendous time.
Yes.
And of course they get HIV, and their children, of course they have children who are HIV positive, and they're trapped because they've got to make some money, look after often elderly relatives. They're obviously not married. Very hard for them to get married once they're stigmatised like that. Their children are HIV positive, and they have a horrendous situation. So one of the things we're trying to do there is work with Operation Mercy to rescue these women from that enforced prostitution, and to enable them to have some kind of training, either embroidery, tailoring, spoken English or IT skills, so they can get a job, so at least they don't have to rely on prostitution to make money. They still have a rough, tough time, but at least they're out of prostitution. So I mean, that's one form. There's an enormous amount of sexual slavery. I think in Thailand is notorious.
Yes.
But we do a lot of work in Burma. In HART, my small not-for-profit or NGO, we work with the ethnic tribal groups or the ethnic national groups. I mean, all is not well in the beautiful land of Burma. People think since the famous iconic democracy leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, was freed, some political prisoners have been freed, people think it's okay in Burma now. Well, it is not okay in Burma now. In HART, we're working with the ethnic national peoples who are still suffering horrendous military offences by the Burmese army, killings, rape as a weapon of war, gross violations of human rights, hundreds of thousands displaced, expropriation of land, driven off their land with nothing. Kachin state, which is a predominantly Christian state, fighting is still going on. And let's give one heartbreaking example of the kind of horrendous treatment. You went through a village in Kachin state which was deserted. When we asked why it was deserted, we were told, well, the villagers were down in, it's a hill tribe, it's very hilly, very beautiful, heartbreakingly beautiful. But the villagers were down in the paddy fields looking off their rice. There was a Burmese army camp on a hillside above, and one day the Burmese soldiers came and abducted a woman from the village and took her up to the army camp. And all the village could see, she was tied to a post up there. Then every now and then she was removed, and I can only imagine the most horrific things that happened. And then she was back there for several days, and then she eventually disappeared forever. Now her parents, her husband, her kids had to see that happening to their beloved wife, mother, daughter. These are the heartbreak situations that are going on now in Burma. The Shan people are predominantly Buddhist. They're also suffering tremendous military offensive expropriation of land. The Rohingya Muslim people also suffering. So we do need to speak up and speak out and try and help practically and try to get rid of the phenomenon of barbaric treatment, including slavery as a weapon of war. So that is just one heartbreaking example from Burma. Could multiply those many times over. India, as I say, a major country. Sudan had the most horrendous policy of systematic slavery as a weapon of war. In the previous war that went from 1989 to 2005, the Jihad perpetrated by Khartoum, we were told by Arab traders who came from the north into South Sudan that leaders from the government in Khartoum would go down to the border areas, mobilize local people, give them horses, give them Kalashnikovs, tell them this was jihad. They had a duty to go and attack the Christians' villages. They were sorry they couldn't pay them, but they could keep the bounty of war, including the human bounty. So they legitimated slavery, which is legitimated anyway in that ideology. And so hundreds of thousands of women and children were captured, abducted, forced marched north, sold into slavery. Now we were able to rescue several hundreds of those, and some of their stories are told in this book. And this is my lifetime. I'm not talking about history. I know about me, and I'm not all that old. And there are many families in South Sudan who still lost loved ones to slavery.
Thank you, Baroness Cox. Thank you for being their voice. Thank you for helping them.
Well, it's the least one can do.
Yes.
But together we can make a difference.